While Margaret Atwood was writing The Handmaid's Tale in the 70s and 80s, she had for years collected headlines, articles, and images of real-world examples of how women were treated at the time and in recent history. Some of the headlines read, "Women forced to have babies." That was a story about Romania in the 1980s. And "Catholics say cult taking over," about a New Jersey Catholic cult based on the subordination of women. Or "Why Nazis slaughtered own super race babies," about how the Nazis practiced eugenics even on their own people. In 2019, in an interview with her publisher, Penguin Random House, Margaret Atwood was asked about her research process for The Handmaid's Tale and how she made up a world like Gilead, where the story takes place. She said, "I didn't even research it. There was no internet then. You just couldn't go online and put in a topic. So this is just stuff I came across when reading newspapers and magazines. I cut things out and put them in a box. I already knew what I was writing about, and this was backup. In case someone says, 'How did you make this up?' As I've said about 1,000,000 times, I didn't make it up. This is the proof. Everything in these boxes," end quote. Well, now in post-Roe America, our own collection of headlines is piling up. It's been about a year and 9 months since the Dobbs decision, since the end of Roe, since the end of the national right to abortion care. And here are some actual headlines. Report: mothers in states with abortion bans nearly 3 times more likely to die. In Oklahoma, a woman was told to wait until she's crashing for abortion care. Then Kate Cox sought an abortion in Texas. A court said no because she didn't show her life was in danger. Despite severe, likely fatal anomalies that also put her life and health at risk, she and 4 other women with similar stories filed a suit against the state of Texas. Almost simultaneously, nearly 24 more women denied abortions in Texas joined lawsuit against the state. Abortion ban states have seen 65,000 pregnancies from rape, study estimates. A 10-year-old rape victim forced to travel from Ohio to Indiana for abortion. A 13-year-old rape victim has baby amid confusion over state's abortion ban. Doctors around the country are leaving their home states because they can't provide care anymore. And for the doctors who haven't left, some feel that they're being forced to go against their better medical judgment to avoid imprisonment. Last week, the Center for Reproductive Rights released a report detailing the impact of abortion bans in Louisiana, where doctors who perform abortion risk losing their medical licenses, $200,000 in fines, and face up to 15 years in prison. The report found that doctors in the state are deeply fearful of retribution, so much so that they are going against best practices to ensure that they aren't in violation of Louisiana law. The report found that women are being given high-risk, unnecessary surgeries instead of simple abortion procedures. They're being forced to wait until their life is at risk to receive care. Treatment for ectopic pregnancies and non-viable pregnancies are being withheld. Even standard prenatal care is being pushed off. One doctor interviewed for the report said they witnessed their colleague make the emotional decision to go against what she knew was best for her patient. Quote, "She ended up having to take this person for a C-section to preserve the appearance of not doing an abortion, even though this is not a viable pregnancy." What that means is now this person has had a C-section, right? And that means that she's at higher risk for any future pregnancies. She can no longer deliver vaginally. The appropriate thing to do, once again, would be dilation and evacuation, a standard abortion procedure, without subjecting the patient to this unnecessary abdominal surgery. But my colleague didn't feel like she could do that while remaining in compliance with the law or appearing to remain in compliance with the law, end quote. To perform a C-section, surgeons have to cut through the layers of the abdominal wall, cut through the uterus, remove the fetus, and then stitch everything back up. It's far more invasive, far more risky, requires far more recovery time than an abortion, and significantly increases the risk of complications in future pregnancies, something that is actually a real risk in America. The report continues that doctors describe not being able to treat pregnant patients for cancer promptly because the state would not allow them to terminate the pregnancies. How aggressive does a cancer have to be put into the category of the mother's life being at risk if the pregnancy isn't terminated? Suicidal patients have been forced to carry their pregnancies to term. Patients with signs of miscarriage have been turned away from emergency departments. One patient with an ectopic pregnancy was denied an abortion until her fallopian tubes ruptured. "I could have died," she said. "I really could have died." In The Handmaid's Tale, Atwood's protagonists wonder about the fate of her pregnant friend. In their world, pregnancy is mandated. There are no tests to determine the viability of the pregnancy or the risks to the mother. There are no abortions, no C-sections to save the life of the mother, and medical care has been reduced to a biblically led ritual dedicated to fertility, conception, and more births. What will of Warren give birth to? A baby, as we all hope, or something else? An unbaby? There's no telling. They could tell once with machines, but that is now outlawed. What would be the point of knowing anyway? You can't have them taken out. Whatever it is must be carried to term. Once they have drugged women, induced labor, cut them open, sewed them up, no more. No anesthetics even. Aunt Elizabeth said it was better for the baby. For more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Michelle Goodwin. She's a professor of constitutional law and global health policy at Georgetown Law School, host of the podcast On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin, and an award-winning author of multiple important books, including Policing the Womb, Invisible Women, and the Criminalization of Motherhood. And Michelle, every time I talk to you, the title of your book becomes more prescient and more relevant. It's not even policing. It's beyond criminalizing. It is absolute and total control over all aspects of reproductive health now.
That's right. And you're absolutely right. One can't help but understand the violations of human rights, fundamental matters of life and death, which the Supreme Court has even acknowledged in 2016 in its case Whole Woman's Health v. Hellerstedt, that a woman is 14 times more likely to die carrying a pregnancy to term in the United States than by having an abortion. And you see the basic denial of human rights in these cases, basic denial of personhood of women, girls, and people with the capacity for pregnancy. And it's horrific. I mean, one needs to really pause to just think about those whose lives have been lost since the Dobbs decision, whose lives were lost before that, and what's to come. Just as you were mentioning, teenage girls who are not even teenagers yet, now going into elementary school and middle school as mothers. These are absolutely horrific times that are captured by The Handmaid's Tale, and perhaps not even captured enough by something like that, because it's real life. It's no longer science fiction.
So I'm sure, as I hold up this book with you and me, that some conservative blog somewhere is going to show that. They're going to say there's a whole lot of hyperbole comparing what's happening in the United States now to The Handmaid's Tale. But the point you just made is that maybe this doesn't go far enough about the things that are happening. And I bring you to Alabama, right? The Supreme Court ban on IVF, which nobody could actually figure out. Is that anti-family? Is that pro-family? Is that anti-women? Is that pro-women? Nobody could figure it out. So Republicans in Alabama rushed to guarantee the right to IVF. We're at this point where the control has overtaken rationale entirely.
That's absolutely right. It's where with the race car, the wheels have come off. It's where a movement has forgotten why it's there. And fundamentally, as you mentioned, it really is about control. And it's important for us to understand that the progress towards and the process of democratizing women's citizenship is still a path that we're on. It would be wrong to think of this as only in this moment. Let's be clear that when there were the people who came and colonized in this country, they had decisions to make about equality for all, and they decided it was equality only for men who were wealthy and who could own property. We're talking about explicitly written out of law where women and their ability to vote, their ability to be able to govern their own lives. Men could rape their wives, and that was tolerated in American law up until the 1980s, not the 1880s, but up until the 1980s. Men could beat their wives, and women couldn't even recover in civil court, and that up until just a couple decades ago. So this has really been about a process of citizenship and the denial of women's citizenship over a long arc of American history. And, you know, let's not be confused by women having C-suite offices and being CEOs and directors of big companies now, because still there are women who are dying when they want basic reproductive health care. And let's be clear, this is a country that up until about a generation ago, there were women who couldn't get credit cards in their own names, checking accounts in their own names, women who were denied the ability to be able to serve on juries, with cases challenged up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sanctioning all these kinds of cases. This is what made Ruth Bader Ginsburg so famous in working for the ACLU and striking down over 100 sex discriminatory laws. And so what we see ourselves on is a path still towards democratizing women's basic fundamental human rights, and we should never lose sight of that.
One thing that I wanted to talk to you about that you and I have spoken about in the past is something about medicine, and that is the report out of Louisiana that I mentioned highlights a national trend of rising maternal morbidity and racial disparity. Louisiana already has the highest rates of maternal morbidity in the nation. America's maternal morbidity rate is substantially higher than most people would guess that it would. Black women are twice as likely to die in childbirth than white women are. And this report describes the challenges that many black and low-income women have already faced before any of these bans, including what they call OB deserts, obstetrician deserts. Now people face even higher barriers. One physician said in the report, quote, there's going to be a population of women that can't get this done within this amount of time. They're just not going to be able to pull it off. They're not going to be able to get the money together. They're not going to be able to get the transportation together. They're not going to be able to make the arrangements. I think that's part of the point of narrowing the window. I'm sure it is. Tell me about that.
Well, part of the point is cruelty, which we've heard in other ways about the demise of our democracy. And let's be clear, in these very same states, there's tremendous voter suppression, where it's become very difficult for black women to be able to access the ballot, where they stand in line for hours and hours, and then the polling places close without them being able to cast their votes. And you're absolutely right. The United States leads all of its peer nations in terms of maternal mortality and morbidity. And the figure that you mentioned, twice plus, the rate of death during pregnancy, that's national. When we actually drill down to some of these counties in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, it's 5 times more likely to die, 10 times more likely to die, 17 times more likely to die than their white counterparts. And what this really shows is a new Jane Crow. It's the same old patterns from before, now repeated in different kinds of ways. It's after the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1965 Voting Rights Act, we still find ourselves needing the protections that are claimed in that kind of congressional legislation. And you also see states fighting back. States saying that we don't have to follow federal law, that we're meant to protect people, their civil rights, their voting rights. And we even see that with the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, with President Biden said, look, this should be used to protect people who need abortions. And you have states fighting back saying we don't have to pay attention to federal law. It is alarming, and that's a case that's coming up before the United States Supreme Court, a Supreme Court where Americans have lost confidence and faith. These are really challenging times, really horrific times is really the best way to describe it.
Michelle, thank you as always for being with us. Michelle Goodwin is a professor of constitutional law and global health policy at Georgetown Law School, host of the podcast On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin, and an award-winning author of multiple important books, including Policing the Womb, Invisible Women, and the Criminalization of Motherhood.